She had a key. That's the part I keep coming back to. My sister had a key to my house, and she used it exactly once to leave a card on my kitchen counter that said, "Thinking of you," while I was 3 floors above her in an ICU waiting room, watching my son fight to breathe. I'll get to that. But first, you need to understand what our family looked like before everything fell apart. Because from the outside, we looked fine. We looked more than fine. We looked like the kind of family that shows up on Christmas card lists and gets mentioned in toasts at weddings. My name is Nadia. I'm 32 years old. I live in Hamilton, Ontario, and I have a son named Eli who is 5 years old and absolutely obsessed with fire trucks. He sleeps with a plastic ladder in his bed. He refuses to eat anything orange unless it's a Cheez-It, which he pronounces Cheez-Its, no matter how many times I correct him. He is the most specific, most stubborn, most alive person I have ever met. And for 11 days in February 2 years ago, I did not know if he was going to make it to his 4th birthday. My husband, I'll call him my husband, we were common law but it's easier, had died 14 months before that. Cardiac event. He was 34, he coached recreational hockey on Thursday nights, he made very good scrambled eggs, and then one Tuesday morning he was gone. No warning, no history. Just gone. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that grief because this story isn't really about losing him. It's about what his absence revealed about the people around me. Grief is like a floodlight. It lights up everything, including the things you'd rather not see. After he died, I went back to work part-time. I'm a dental hygienist, and my mother-in-law watched Eli 3 days a week. My own parents were in Oakville, 40 minutes away. My sister Renata lived in Burlington, maybe 25 minutes. We weren't close in the way people mean when they say close, but we had dinner every few weeks and we texted each other memes and we showed up for birthdays. I thought that meant something. I really did. February came in cold that year. Eli had been fighting a cough for about a week, the kind that sounds wetter every morning. And I kept thinking I was being paranoid because I had become the kind of mother who checked his breathing while he slept. My therapist at the time said that was normal after losing a partner suddenly. Hypervigilance, she called it. I called it staying alive. On a Wednesday night, around 1 in the morning, Eli woke up crying and I could hear immediately that something was wrong. Not cough wrong. Something in the sound of his breathing, something tight and labored and high-pitched. I picked him up and his lips had a grayish tinge. I did not call my parents. I did not call my sister. I called 911 and I grabbed his blanket and I stood on my front porch in February in socks and I waited for the ambulance. McMaster Children's Hospital. They took him straight through. No waiting room, which if you've ever been to an emergency department with a child you know means it's serious. Respiratory distress, they said. His oxygen levels were dangerously low. They put him on supplemental oxygen and started talking about a pediatric intensive care unit, and I stood in a hallway holding his fire truck blanket and I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring, which means she wasn't asleep. I told her what was happening. I told her where we were. I told her I was alone and I didn't know what was happening yet and I needed her to come. She said, "Oh my God, Nadia." And then she said, "Your father and I leave for Costa Rica on Friday." I thought I'd heard wrong. I actually said, "What?" She said they had booked this trip 8 months ago. They were going with another couple, friends of theirs from their old neighborhood. It was a resort package, 2 weeks, already paid in full. She said she'd look into whether they could get anything back on the insurance, but she wasn't sure, and she said maybe I should call Renata. I called Renata. Renata said she had a work conference starting Thursday in Ottawa, in person, and her boss had already been flexible with her this quarter. She said, "What does the hospital actually need you to do? Are you just sitting there?" And I said, "Yes, Renata, I am just sitting there. My son is in the PICU, and I am sitting in a hallway alone." She said she'd try to rearrange some things and she'd let me know. She didn't let me know. Not that night, not the next morning. Eli's pediatric intensivist, Dr. Mann Singh, who I will love for the rest of my life, came and found me around 4 a.m. and explained that Eli had a severe case of RSV that had progressed into bronchiolitis and was affecting his ability to breathe on his own. They were managing it, but it was going to be a few days at minimum, possibly longer. He asked if there was anyone who could be with me. I said I'd figure it out. I called my mother-in-law at 6 in the morning. She was there by 8. She brought a thermos of coffee and a sandwich I didn't ask for, and she sat down next to me and put her hand over mine and didn't say anything for a while. She is 61 years old. She took 2 buses because she doesn't drive. My parents flew to Costa Rica on Friday. I found that out from my mother's Instagram story, which showed a photo of a resort pool with a sunset filter and the caption, "Finally." I stared at that photo for a long time. I was sitting in a hospital cafeteria, eating a granola bar at the time, and Eli had had a rough night, and I hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. I looked at that photo and I felt something go very quiet inside me. Not angry, or not only angry, something colder than anger. Something that felt like a door closing. I didn't text her. I didn't call. I just put my phone face down and finished my granola bar. They were gone for 14 days. Eli was in the hospital for 11. He came home on a Sunday, and my mother-in-law had been there every single day, sometimes both days on the weekend. She had cleaned my house while I was at the hospital. She had bought groceries. She had set up a little humidifier in Eli's room because she'd read that it would help. My parents came home on a Tuesday. My mother texted me that afternoon, "Home, how's our little guy? Can we come see him this weekend?" I didn't answer. She texted again 2 days later. My father called and left a voicemail saying they brought back a stuffed toucan for Eli. I didn't call back. Renata texted saying she heard I wasn't responding to Mom and was everything okay. Everything was so far from okay that I didn't even know where to start. I sat down with Eli's therapist. Yes, he had a therapist, even at 3, because children who lose a parent very young sometimes need that kind of support. And I talked through what I was feeling, and she helped me understand something. I wasn't just angry at my parents for going on a trip. I was angry because I had spent 14 months telling myself that my family was there, even if they weren't physically present. I had told myself the memes and the dinners and the occasional drop-bys meant I wasn't alone. And then I was actually alone in the most frightening 14 months of my life, and the evidence was undeniable. I called my mother 3 weeks after Eli came home. She picked up immediately. I told her calmly that I needed her to understand what those 11 days had been like. I told her I'd been alone in that hospital more often than not. I told her that her friend had been there every single day, on 2 buses, while my own mother was posting pool photos. I wasn't yelling. I want to be clear about that. I was very quiet, actually. My mother said, "We didn't know it would be that serious." I said, "I called you from the emergency department at 1 in the morning and told you his lips were gray." She said, "We had non-refundable tickets, Nadia. You know how much that trip cost?" And then she said something that I think about a lot. Something that I have turned over so many times trying to understand it. She said, "You always manage. You've always been the one who manages." I think she meant it as a compliment. I hung up. And then I didn't call her back. Not for her birthday in April, not for Mother's Day, not for my niece's graduation party in June, which Renata texted me about 3 times in increasingly pointed language. I want to say something here that I mean very genuinely. I do not think my parents are evil people. I think they are people who had a story in their heads about who I was, and they were too comfortable to revise that story when the evidence suggested they should. That's not the same as evil, but it's its own kind of failure, and it's not something I know how to forgive quickly. The weeks turned into months. Eli's health stabilized and then improved, and then he became obsessed with fire trucks and started calling his grandmother, his real grandmother, his father's mother, Nana Bear, which she pretends to find embarrassing and very obviously loves. She is the one who taught him to say please and thank you without being reminded, which is more than I managed. I got a part-time day placement sorted out, went back to work full-time in the fall, started saving money again, started feeling, slowly and carefully, like I might be okay, like the ground was solid again. And then, 18 months after Eli came home from the hospital, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer. My parents had updated their estate documents. My father had some health issues the previous spring. I heard about this secondhand through my aunt because I was not told directly, and they had apparently decided to put their affairs in order. The lawyer was calling because I was named in the will and there had been some recent changes, and my parents wanted to discuss them with me directly before the documents were finalized. I said I'd call back. I sat with it for 2 days. I didn't want their money. I want to be completely honest about that. I wasn't sitting around thinking about what my parents might leave behind. I had built a life that didn't include them, and it was a smaller life than I'd imagined. But it was mine, and it was sturdy. I wasn't waiting for anything from them. But I also knew that if I ignored this call, Renata would end up with everything, and somehow that bothered me in a way I hadn't expected. Not because of the money, because of the truth of it. Because walking away entirely felt like agreeing that what had happened hadn't happened. Like signing off on a version of events where my parents chose right and I overreacted. I called the lawyer back and asked for a meeting. She was a woman named, well, I'll just say she was very organized, very professional, and extremely good at not showing what she was thinking. She laid out the documents clearly. My parents had substantial assets, a house in Oakville that had appreciated significantly, investments, savings. They were doing fine financially. They'd always been doing fine. The updated will had a clause. If I had not, in their words, re-established regular contact with them within 18 months of their deaths, my share would be redirected to Renata, my sister who had not rearranged a single work meeting. My sister, who had texted me asking if I was just sitting there. I read the clause twice. I looked up at the lawyer and I said, "Is this legal?" She said, "Testators have broad discretion in Canada about conditional bequests." She said I could contest it, but it would be difficult and expensive and the outcome wasn't certain. She said she wasn't able to advise me on what to do, only to explain what the document said. I thanked her and I drove home and I sat in my car in my driveway for about 20 minutes. Then I went inside because Eli was with the neighbor's daughter and she had to leave at 5, and Eli wanted to show me something he built with his blocks. An extremely ambitious fire station with a helipad, he explained. Very seriously. And I sat on the floor of his living room and I looked at his fire station and I said, "That's incredible, buddy," and I meant it. That night, after he was asleep, I called my mother. She answered on the first ring this time. I said I'd met with the lawyer. I said I'd seen the clause. And then I said something I had not planned to say. Something that came out of me fully formed and surprisingly calm. I don't want your money. I never wanted your money. What I wanted in a hospital hallway at 4 in the morning with my son on oxygen was my mother. And you weren't there. She was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "We made a mistake. I know that." It was the first time either of my parents had used that word. Mistake. I said, "I know you do. But knowing it and me pretending it didn't happen are two different things." She asked what I wanted. And I thought about it honestly right there on the phone. Not a prepared answer. What did I want? I said I wanted an actual conversation. Not a reconciliation on their timeline. Not forgiveness on demand. Not dinner, and the pretense that the last 2 years hadn't occurred. I wanted to sit with both of them in a room without Renata and say what I needed to say and have them actually hear it. Not respond, not defend, hear it. She said she talked to my father. That was 4 months ago. We've had 2 of those conversations now. The second one my father cried, which I did not expect, and which did something complicated to me that I'm still working through in therapy. He said he'd been wrong to let my mother make that call. He said he'd told himself I would be fine because it was easier than thinking about what it meant if I wasn't. I don't have a tidy ending. I want to be clear about that. My parents and I are not back to normal, and I'm not sure normal is where I'm trying to get. We're in something that I don't have a word for yet. Cautious. Maybe honest for the first time. The will clause is still there. I haven't asked them to remove it and I'm not going to because that's not why I called my mother. The money is not the point. It was never the point. Ely met my parents for the first time since the hospital last month. My mother brought him a stuffed animal, Not a toucan, a fire dog, which is objectively better, and he accepted it with the gravity of someone receiving a diplomatic gift and then immediately named it Captain. My mother laughed. It was a real laugh. I noticed. I don't know what we're building. I know it's slower and smaller and more conditional than what I thought families were supposed to be. I know that my mother-in-law will always be Nana Bear and no one will ever be more present for Eli than she has been. But I also know that I made the call, not because I needed something from them, because I needed to stop carrying the silence. There's a difference, and learning that difference, figuring out what you fight for and what you finally just say out loud, that's the part nobody tells you about. That's the part that takes the longest. Eli's fire station is still on the shelf in his room. The helipad is still there. He added a second floor last week and informed me, very matter-of-factly, that it's the best fire station in Hamilton. I told him I believed him. I do.